let me give you a few questions. The first is that there are numerous reports that only political decision is left before Pyongyang go ahead with their seventh nuclear test. And it's not coming yet, but many say that it is a matter of time. Given that it is highly unlikely that Russia and China would not cooperate with the United States and South Korea and then support additional UN sanctions against DPRK, what measure can Seoul and Washington take when Pyongyang makes that decision?
Well, I think the first part of your question is correct, which is that at least from our assessment of the nuclear test site in Punggye-ri, our satellite imagery shows that North Korea basically has completed all the work they need to do at Tunnel 3. There are 4 tunnels at Punggye-ri. At Tunnel 3, the underground tunnel there, that look as though they're ready to test at any time. And that really is a decision that's going to be made by the North Korean leader more than anybody else. We do also notice some additional work at Tunnel 4, which may suggest that there is more to come after a 7th nuclear test. But in terms of the premise of the question, absolutely, it looks as though all the preparations are done, and it's really a decision, a political decision for them to go forward. Now, after they test, I think that the United States will have to respond, most likely with some more sanctions. They may not be UN sanctions because Moscow and Beijing are not likely to support a UN Security Council resolution. But I think there will be some additional sanctioning by countries like Japan, perhaps South Korea, and the United States. In addition to that, I think we could see the U.S. move more assets, military assets, to the Korean Peninsula and around the Korean Peninsula. I think these are just things they have to do in response to a 7th nuclear test. Having said that, it could also present an opportunity in the sense that North Korea has been unresponsive to the audacious initiative on the part of the Yoon government. They've been unresponsive to various efforts by the Biden administration to talk to North Korea. And perhaps they may be more ready to talk after they do a 7th test from their own mind because they believe they will approach negotiations from a position of strength. So I think initially there will have to be a response by the U.S. and South Korea, but there could also be an opportunity for diplomacy after the initial punishment for doing a 7th test.
Then what did you expect that, from South Korea and the United States side when there's some sign from the North that we'll meet and discuss what?
So I think that there will be probably the initial efforts will have to do with food and humanitarian assistance. Both the Biden administration and the Yoon administration have said that they're willing to provide food and medical assistance to North Korea separate from denuclearization. We actually hosted a talk at CSIS where a U.S. official stated that formally, and we've also heard that from the Yoon administration. So that would probably be the first step. After that, I think the North Koreans would have to commit to coming back to talks. And if they committed to coming back to talks, we could see some sanctions lifting. I think the audacious initiative certainly has suggested that there would be assistance to North Korea if they simply made the commitment to come back to talks. And I think the Biden administration would welcome that. And so I think those would be the initial steps. And then we'd see if there could be actual negotiations over getting back to freezing the nuclear facility, stopping testing, things of that nature. It's frankly not very appealing for all of us who've either studied or worked on these negotiations before to have to go through that same process again. But unfortunately with North Korea, I don't think we have much of a choice.
Well, in doing so, one increasing concern from the South is that, let me read, Kim Jong-un's speech that, North Korean nuclear weapons would never be confined to the single mission of war deterrent, but potentially carry out strikes against anyone who violates North Korea's core interest. So, and then he repeated it. So now, UN government, faces the situation where, nuclear weapons is not just the deterrence, but, it can be used, towards South Korea. So that arouses, deterrence, and particularly, extended deterrence or U.S. commitment and others. So, so it seems like, Pyongyang's nuclear strategy is changing. So what's your thoughts, and what would be Seoul and Washington's response to that?
So I think that North Korea has learned some lessons from the war in Ukraine that are reflected in some of these statements that you just read by Kim Jong-un. For one, I think it just reinforces their perception that they need to keep nuclear weapons in order not to be attacked. Again, their perception is that Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons and they were attacked by Russia. The historical reality is much more complicated than that. Ukraine never owned these nuclear weapons. They inherited them. They never had control over them. So it's a different situation, but that certainly reinforces their view that possession is an important deterrent against external attack. The second and the more worrying lesson is, as you described, this notion that North Korea would not deny a first use doctrine, that they could threaten the use of nuclear weapons not just as a retaliatory strike, but as a first strike. I think that is certainly something that's very concerning, a very concerning lesson they could have learned from Putin's threats to NATO countries at the beginning of the Ukraine war not to intervene. Having said that, I think that we still don't know fully how North Korea how their nuclear doctrine will evolve. So just to give one example, they see the possession of nuclear weapons and the nuclear complex at Yongbyon right now as an asset. But if we look at what's happening in the war in Ukraine, Russia now appears to be threatening the nuclear complex in Ukraine. If something happens to that nuclear complex in Ukraine as a result of some Russian strike, either on purpose or inadvertent, and some sort of disaster occurs there, all of a sudden possession of that nuclear complex now could look like a liability to North Korea. So the point is, I'm not predicting that will happen, but we just don't know yet how they're thinking about their possession of nuclear weapons will evolve over time. Right now, they see it entirely as a good thing in terms of their self-defense and in terms of possibly a denial strategy, denying other countries like the United States the ability to assist South Korea. But there are real liabilities to having a nuclear complex and a nuclear weapons program that is as vulnerable to strike as theirs is, that could possibly become a more important part of their calculations and thinking because of things like what's happening in Ukraine. So I don't think the full story on this has been written yet.
Right. Well, given that, here, South Korea and the United States, you get to deal with sort of new or shifting nuclear strategy of North Korea, and initial reaction is extended deterrence, that kind of reassurance. Also, how Washington's focus on enhancing integrated deterrence in connection with efforts to enhance extended deterrence. What's your view?
So I think it's very important. I think the fact that North Korea's current missile testing campaign and development of these weapons seems unstoppable right now. This naturally raises questions in South Korea about the credibility of U.S. extended deterrence. I think it's the fact that Koreans are talking about it more, I think, is a reflection of the fact that there is now an understanding that denuclearization is not anything that will happen in the near term, and that we have to live with a nuclear North Korea. And so that has led to lots of questions about extended deterrence. I think the United States understands this. I think they understand that it's very important. When I think about extended deterrence or improving extended deterrence, I think about two things. One of them is military capabilities, and the other, as you suggested, is political reassurance, political signaling and reassurance. Of these two, I think the political signaling and reassurance is more important. In other words, I think a marginal improvement in capabilities is necessary, but where the work of extended deterrence really needs to be done is on the political reassurance side. What are new things that the U.S. and South Korea can do together on nuclear deterrence that demonstrates the credibility of U.S. commitment? I don't think that the answer to that question, at least right now, is to bring tactical nuclear weapons back to the Korean Peninsula. I don't think that's the answer, at least right now. Right. And I don't think South Korea acquiring their own nuclear weapons is the answer right now either. But I do think that there are things. I know that the public supports it, but I think there are things that the United States and South Korea can do right now that would help to improve extended deterrence. To me, the issue of support for South Korea having nuclear weapons is not really well thought out. As you know well, it's a classic security dilemma, because things that South Korea may want to do to enhance their own security with the acquisition of nuclear weapons could actually make everybody less secure, not more secure, because of the second and third order consequences, which we can certainly talk about, but the second and third order consequences from acquiring nuclear weapons.
Well, thank you.